So today I have a very, very special guest with me. This is Anuki. I just met her last week, but I loved her energy and I was like, I have to talk to her. Okay, so Anuki, maybe you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and like, who you are, what you do, where you come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Divya, for having me, really. Hi, everyone. I'm Anuki Premachandra, and I'm based in Sri Lanka. I am the CEO and founder of Lines. We are a digital strategy and social media marketing agency based out of Sri Lanka, and very happy to be here. Thanks, Divya.
Oh, but you also have to tell that like you were doing something completely different like till last year or something.
I was, yeah. So when I met Divya last week, we were talking about, where we are right now in our journeys, in our careers. So for about 10 years, I've actually been working in the development sector with international NGOs, local NGOs, think tanks, that sort of thing. But I've been doing a lot of comms work for them. So that's really how I ended up with the company I started. But yeah, it's been a career in development.
So one of the things that I was like, so I was looking up your LinkedIn and I also sent you a request, but like I was looking at it and you have held a lot of leadership positions. And guys, I know Anuki said that like, she has 10 years of experience, but she's really young. She's like approximately a decade younger than I am. So it was just like really interesting to see that you have so many sort of like leadership roles from the beginning of your career almost. Like, what was it like? I don't know, being shoved into a leadership position where you are like, maybe especially in development sector, I'm sure there are people that you were leading who were much older than you, right? Like, I was just curious about that.
That is a great question. And that's something I think really struggled with maybe up until this year, because finally this year and last year, towards the end of last year, I started having people in my team who were younger to me. So it was like, okay, great. But until then, it was an uphill battle, let me tell you. For starters, with my very first job, it was an internship and it was at a international development organization, one of the country offices in Sri Lanka. And something I realized in one of like my very first meetings, I remember somebody asked me to get them some coffee and I was like, oh, okay, not a problem. But then I realized, oh, like with my age and everything, sometimes when you sit at a table, people don't realize that you have something to contribute to, right? It's like, oh, the young one, the intern just fetched some coffee, which I did. It's like, hey, I'm also here because I think I can contribute in some way. So I remember that incident specifically because after that I told myself, I'm not telling my age to anybody, because at that point I was just 18. So I was like, nobody is going to know. And I kept it concealed for a very long time. So now when I do tell people my age, and then I say, I've been working for about 10 years, da, 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 it's like, what? How young were you when you started? And how did,
Yeah.
we not know about it? But yeah. And to sort of the second thing you asked me, the whole thing about being in leadership positions, I think it happened very organically because I've realized that I have like a very strong growth mindset also for me personally. So at the start, when I was taking on some interesting jobs, it was because I was truly interested in the work. And to me, it was like, okay, how can I contribute more? How can I do more? And I think that's what kind of organically funneled into, me starting to lead teams. But yeah, I just feel like I'm always learning every day. You never know how to do these things, especially, working with a team, building team morale, all of these things you learn every day. So, yeah.
Yeah. I would also imagine that like in comms work, you've also done some PR, I think, right? Like you meet all sorts of people at all level and you have to manage even people who are like I'm just as you actually, why don't you tell what is like relations and PR and comms? What is that like in the social sector?
In the social sector, well, one problem is everybody comes from a very technical field, and a lot of people that come together to work on a development sector project to address a social issue come with their specific expertise. So when you're working on a project, you'll have economists, you'll have researchers, you'll have different kinds of people coming together. But something that I can say very confidently is that a lot of the people coming together don't necessarily understand good communication.
Hmm.
because everybody, they're very like technical experts in their fields, and sometimes they forget that the research they do, or the programming they do, is for a much wider population that probably doesn't understand things the way they do. So that is something very common in the development world. And even more recently, I've seen sometimes, I guess, organizations and people think that they need to stick to the jargons to make it sound like they're doing amazing things. But I really believe in impact communications, right? Talking about what doing this means to real people. So I think that's, like, for me, a very interesting learning about development sector comms.
And how does it like, so how does it relate to like now you're doing marketing more
Yeah.
broadly for like, all sorts of people. So like
Yeah.
how does that learning sort of translate? What carries over, what doesn't?
So I think that the learning I got from the social sector really got me thinking in a very different way that I don't see sometimes a lot of corporate communications people think. Because it's more about selling a product, and it
Hmm.
seems like a very straightforward thing. But with development sector communications, it's about behavior change in some way. It's either about telling people about a social issue that they are not aware of, and you need to communicate why they need to be worried about it,
Hmm.
or it's, to raise advocacy on something, or it's always, it has a component of behavior change in it. So it almost gets your mind thinking differently. And I feel like that is what I now pull into the company I run, because at Lines we do both corporate sector communications and development sector too. So corporate is, a sales clients basically. Very straightforward product to sell, very straightforward target audience. And it's about that. But I do actually, because of my interests and because I've, been in this field for quite a while, I do take on quite a lot of development sector clients now as well. So I'm always enjoying that process of being able to think with a team, think about the research question they were trying to answer, looking at their reports, but also thinking, okay, how do I make this more relatable to a more general audience?
How interesting. So it's almost like you have to present complicated findings to the general public.
It's like that, right? If you're talking about even climate change, conversations like that, things that you need, you need to plant seeds, and planting those seeds and, waiting for them to sow, that you got to figure out how to do that.
Interesting. How do you do that? Like, I've always found it very complicated, especially like all of these awareness campaigns and stuff. Like, I have friends who work in like the development sector as well. And it just, like, to me, it just feels like hopelessly, like, uphill battle. It's just like, how are you going to figure out if you're even making a change?
Measuring impact is definitely a very hard thing to do. And you don't see impact through one campaign. And I always tell my clients, general public is not a target audience. It's really important to hone down and think, who do we need to speak to first, so that, that we're able to have them on our side, and then have them help us advocate for whatever it is that we're advocating for. So a couple of years I learned about the Overton window, and I've been using that when talking about campaigning to say, okay, how do we identify like the early adopters? How do we identify audiences within the public population that would be more inclined to your views, to support your views? So let's try that conversion first, and then slowly we sort of build, you try to build up. And I think something that people also don't realize is campaigning like this takes a very long time, especially when you're advocating for some kind of cause, for, some sort of policy change. I've been doing that quite a bit here in Sri Lanka. And something that I've been realizing is you got to keep, you got to keep to a consistent campaign. And there's different windows that open up where some of these things quickly become public discourse. And then you got to, capitalize on it.
Interesting. Sounds hard. Harder than at least selling a product.
This is true. Oh God, yeah.
What kind of causes or like, what kind of things did you generally I don't know. Okay, maybe the question I want to ask is more, did you sort of incorporate your own advocacy and your own like sort of interests in the social sector with the communication for like, whatever you worked on?
Yeah, I did. About 5 years ago, I was working with a think tank based out of Colombo, a free market think tank. And it was probably about a year into taking that job on. There was a report that came out that the team had worked on, and it basically said imported sanitary napkins were taxed at 101%, diapers were taxed again at some 120%, making, diapers unaffordable to new parents. And one of my colleagues had written out an op-ed on this. And I remember reading it and getting really enraged about the sanitary napkins and about, the diapers, and thinking, why don't we do a campaign on this? And I remember at that point, with the support of the team, we got something off the ground. And I realized that and then I sort of took that on as well, quite personally, because I started realizing the more I spoke to people, the more I realized how period poverty manifested in Sri Lanka, even in Colombo.
Can you double click on that? Like what does that mean?
Sorry?
What does that mean? Like what is
Period
period?
poverty?
Yeah.
Right. So the inability to be able to afford basic sanitation and hygiene and period products because of unaffordability, because the price is too high or because it's unavailable in the market. And the more people I spoke to at that point, this was going into COVID, going into the pandemic. So there was definitely shortages across the board of different products. But the more people I spoke to, the more I realized that some moms were making the choice to put food on the table versus buying a packet of sanitary pads to
My
feed
God.
their kids. And, these sort of stories enraged me as well. And I think we really pushed very hard on that advocacy. Were able to get the tax down to about 60 something percent at that time. And this was, a couple of governments ago. And still, with every new government, with every different import tariff structure, these things continue to change. And I've realized that it's really important to keep on with the advocacy. That's what, it's something that once the policy changes started to happen, it's something that I too dropped my voice on. I, saw progress happening. But now looking at it again and looking at different administrations, different tariff structures, I'm realizing, you need to be consistent at advocacy like that. But that was really a big learning curve for me in terms of how I started thinking about advocacy communications, because I felt like I wasn't doing it for someone else. I was
Yeah.
doing it for something I was passionate about. So I was very observant in how people reacted to what I said, the kind of words I used to talk about this. I was getting invited to panels, webinars quite a bit during COVID, and I was trying to see how much sort of groundswell we can create so that policymakers saw the importance of it. Because that was my problem. It was when I was having direct conversations with policymakers and policy influencers, this was on nobody's agenda. Like, this wasn't
Hmm.
important enough for
Yeah.
anybody to speak out in parliament even. So there was that need to build up a lot of groundswell so that, politicians and representatives started seeing this as a problem too.
Wow. Wow. That sounds intense. But I'm glad that you did it. Yeah. How do you feel like now that you're out of the development sector directly, right?
Yeah.
And you're more focused on doing like building your company, because I'm assuming that now that you're working on it full time, you're going to be much more focused, at least for the coming 12 to 18 months, or
Yeah.
you can share the timelines or whatever. But how do you feel like that's going to impact your advocacy? Do you still do activism actively?
Not actively at the moment, but what I have been doing is working with development sector clients that I align with. And I think that has been wonderful. I just recently started working with another international organization working on women's equality and women's rights. And, I do a little bit of volunteerism work with regards to sexual and reproductive health. And that's something I've been doing that for a couple of years now. So the good thing now about having my own setup has been I feel like I'm able to contribute a lot more, because previously it was about either my campaign or working for a particular organization was running a particular campaign. But now that I'm able to take on more clients and work much broadly with a team, I feel like I'm able to contribute to a couple of different topics or needs.
Interesting. Maybe I should connect you to this friend of mine. She runs this company that works in women's health. It's called Cranberry, and like both the founders are friends of mine, and like I interviewed one of them like on the podcast a couple of seasons back. But basically, like what they do is like they have a like digital product which is like a chatbot that helps you sort of manage your period, and like you can talk to it about your symptoms and all of that. Like it'll send you messages, oh, what kind of PMS are you having, or like do you have this thing or do you have that thing, do you want to track these symptoms and all of that. But they're also like doing a lot of on ground work, so they're working with a sports organization based out of Pune, I think, and where they're helping with female athletes. And because, like, I'm sure you know this, but like, sort of in reproductive, sexual, and like menstrual health, the research is also abysmally poor,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So they're basically like running their own sort of like trials and all of that. They're also like doing physical products. So like these kits that help you manage your PMS. So like there's medication, there's supplements, there is like, other extra stuff that can help you sort of manage your mood. So there's like, oh, here is a like, I'll show you. There's this like really tiny, cute, yeah. So this is
Yeah.
like a meditation light. So it like, has a breathing pattern. Let me turn it on. So like I don't know if you can see it, but
I
like it turns
can.
green and then purple and then it'll turn blue
That is so
in a bit.
cute.
Yeah, and now it turned blue, right? Like it is really awesome. So you can breathe with the puppy.
Oh, so this is something that your friends do?
Yeah. So they have these kits that like you can buy. So I have the one for PMS, but they also have for period migraines. They have for pain and cramps, like different medical devices with medication, talking to gynecologists. So like they're building this. Like again, it's been a couple of years. They're also like relatively new, but I feel like you might be interested in just chatting with them.
Absolutely. That looks amazing. That's such a cool thing to think about, right?
Yeah.
You're being supported. I love that.
Yeah. It's also really interesting because, like, I have. So, our first, like, for the first season where we started interviewing people, season four, I think, we only interviewed women because, like, Karan and I are both fortunate that, like, we had so many women founders. And then in second season, we interviewed people who were working with, like, somebody who's very close to them. And, like, so it's like siblings or partners or something like that. And I was like, you fit both categories.
I love this.
Okay, so that detour aside, okay, so like it's really interesting, but tell me why you decided to sort of start your own company, and like how did you decide on this particular niche? Because I'll go back to what you said, you can't do everything for everyone. So like how did you decide your box? Because I feel like for a lot of people, drawing that box of this is who I am for is really challenging, right? So like
Yeah.
how did you go about it?
Well, I have to say, Divya, I am only now claiming my space in said box because for the longest time, I started this because it's something that I like to do. That's honestly how I started this. When I started this, with my partner helping me out because he's also been in this sort of field for about a decade. So there was a lot from him that I was, learning in terms of performance marketing, in terms of, thinking about sales conversions, ROIs, because I'm more of a content strategy person. But you also need the person looking at analytics and saying, hey, maybe we should do this differently. And I would always look to him to do that. And so then I thought, I've got the strength to start this on. I feel like I'll be able to do something that I like to do. And that's really how all of this started. And I didn't realize at that time, because when you think of setting up businesses, and for me, with the other things I do sometimes, you think about your business idea, you think about a business plan, and then you get into it. With lines, that's not what happened. It was completely fueled out of passion of something that I like to do, that just along the way, I think, thanks to the help of my partner, we were kind of able to build into a model that works. So I think the startup journey for me, I feel was a little bit longer, only because it took a little bit of time to figure out what that box looked like. Because I remember the start when, I ventured into this, we ventured in thinking, hey, let's do video productions and maybe let's do, videos with really good storytelling.
Mm.
Because that was a gap in Sri Lanka's market at that point. But I remember we did about two, and it was nice, it was good videos, but we could do more, basically, and we knew that we could do more. So I think we just kind of kept looking for what that meant. And it's only this year that I've been really able to say, okay, this is the company, these are the services, this is the team I'm building. That clarity has been very recent. So to anybody, thinking of starting something completely out of passion, it's a little difficult, I understand, to figure out what your business plan looks like. And that's okay. It will take a little bit of time. So you got to be sort of patient about how you mold that box. But it happens. And then, you're able to say, okay, this is what I can deliver. And let me try to do that the best way I can.
Hmm. Interesting. So what does like, let's say like, we're 5 years down the line. What does success for you look like at that point?
5 years down the line. All right. 5 years down the line, I hopefully want to be known as one of Sri Lanka's, most creative digital agencies, most creative and most sort of impact driven. I want people, when they think of breaking into a new market, launching a new product, thinking of a new target audience, to think, oh, I should go to Lines with this because they'll be able to crack it for me. So I want to be known in Sri Lanka for sure, but I also want to make a little bit of an impact, a lot of impact and footprint outside the country, because I feel like Sri Lanka has a lot to offer. Diva, you were just here last week as
Yeah.
well. Sri Lanka is a beautiful island nation with really interesting people
Yeah.
who, in the creative sector, the kind of people I'm able to work with, the kind of people in my own team, I know that they are capable of a lot that deserves the recognition beyond, our little island. So I
Yeah.
think in 5 years, that's really what I want to do. I want to be in competition with, agencies out of New York, agencies out of Spain, and say, hey, this tiny island's got a lot of creative talent. Give us a chance.
Very exciting. It's also really interesting, right? Like coming from a culture that is what I would say is still a little bit like sheltered. Like the island has its own vibe and like
Yeah,
it's not as polluted by other things in a
yeah,
certain sense. I think like that really brings a unique voice. So
yeah,
like this has been a major qualm of mine that I'm just like all design, like especially digital design, all comes out of like Silicon Valley. Please
yeah,
stop doing this, right? Like it's not, that's not the only place where interesting stuff happens, right?
yeah.
And so like that's also interesting because I feel like the more voices we have, the more interesting it becomes, and the more global it is, the less only US gets to have a say in what is happening everywhere.
Correct. Yeah, spot on. And I think that's what I find beautiful as well. Just what you said. You were in the South Coast. There's so much art and
Hmm.
culture in Sri Lanka, South Coast.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right in that we are in so many sense guarded a lot more creatively as well. I guess less exposed. Not to say less exposed, but in terms of,
Yeah.
our creativity. I get what you mean in that people have like a flavor to their unique piece of work.
Like I felt like in all of the places that we went to, I was saying it to another person who like was in the same retreat as us. Like everywhere in Sri Lanka, you wouldn't see paintings hanging on the wall. You would actually see sculptural objects. And that was really interesting because that's not how it is in any of the other countries that I've been. Like decor generally means that like you would have a lot more paintings. And I was like, it's such a small thing, but like it is its own flavor, right? Like it is its own unique thing. There is also a lot more weaving oriented artifacts, right?
Yeah.
Like whether it's made out of like tree stuff or out of rope or whatever, like there is a lot more weaving oriented art. And like, so it was really interesting because for me as an Indian to go to Sri Lanka, it was like, are neighbors. So they're like kind of similar, but also kind of different.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it would be really exciting if your guys are like, able to sort of expand beyond.
I think so. And I like, for me, that's what I also get really drawn to. And then you're absolutely right. Like, think that there is a lot of communications and trend setting that comes out of the US that really dictates it for the rest of the world. And obviously now with the invent of AI, we're trying to hegemonize creativity in
Mm.
some way, right? We're trying to
Yeah,
say that this is what a good poster looks like, or this is, but that I fear that quite a bit, because I feel like that pushes people to be a little lazy with how their minds work. Do
yeah,
you get what I mean? Because I find
yeah,
myself sometimes getting fallen into that trap of, looking for references and then looking at how I base work out of that, and then sometimes forgetting, no, but what would I have done if I were to
yeah,
create this? So if I were to think of this video idea, how would I have looked at it? And sometimes we tend to forget that. And it was actually somebody at our retreat last week that told me that. And he said, in your field, I've seen this happen quite a lot. Founders have a vision that gets diluted very quickly
um,
because there's a lot of reference points people look for.
yeah,
And he said, whenever that happens, just ask yourself, what would Anuki, do? And I thought, wow, you're
yeah,
right. We
yeah.
tend to forget that sometimes because we can get too exposed.
Yeah. Also, so like another friend of mine that I interviewed, Computational Mama, she is a creative technologist. So she does like a lot of art mixed with technology, right? So like she'll do art with code or art with AI, that kind of stuff. Very interesting stuff. So she did this project called Archive of Lost Mothers because so at some point early in her like mid-journey experiment, she tried to generate an image of a mother birthing a child
Yeah.
and it refused her to do it. And then she tried to generate an image of a war scene, and it
Oh,
was like it let her do that, right? So that's one part. And then, in sort of in any visual AI system, there is very little brown people data,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Which means that, like, her being able to generate a realistic looking brown woman without like a bindi or a sari was like so difficult.
Yeah.
Right, because she's just like, we are not all wearing saris and we're not all putting bindis. Like, please, we are very different.
To date on Midjourney, if you typed generate a Sri Lankan, like, woman for me, 100% it generates an Indian, a person. Yeah, there's always
Yeah,
the saris and the thalas, and I have to say, no, Sri Lankan. And I remember doing this with some of my friends a couple of months ago, and we're like, you know what, let's just give up.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that too, right? Even within the subcontinent, there's differences.
There is a lot of differences. Like a Pakistani or Bangladeshi or a Sri Lankan
Yes,
person
yeah.
doesn't look like Indian person. Yeah, we have a lot of Indian people, which means there is a lot of population. But like, that doesn't mean everybody else is the same.
Exactly.
But yeah, like her project is quite interesting and it also explores the same thing that you're talking about, which is like, are we sort of just painting all of the things with a broad brush stroke and saying, oh, this is all the same and you don't need to think about your uniqueness.
Yeah. Wow. I would love to know more about what your friend is doing. 'Cause that sounds very interesting.
Yeah,
And
I'll
because I,
send you a link too. I'll send you a link to her stuff. Yeah, she's really cool. Like I said, I am very fortunate that I have many cool friends and I'm like, please come on my podcast.
cool, they're doing really interesting things. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting because you asked me about 5 years. I was thinking,
Hmm.
I think in about 5 years, we'll really, because at that point, we're still at the birth of AI, right?
Yeah.
In 5 years, we'd have gotten very far with it because that tech is growing at God's
Yeah.
speed. So I think in 5 years, the creative industries might look very different too. I'm hoping that creative industries were able to stay unique to what they can bring to the table
Yeah.
will still stand the test of time. But it's something to look out for because I do see from my clients quite a bit. People just say, oh, I'll just use AI to do that and I'll just use AI to schedule it. I'll just use AI to create the videos and then I'll just use that to schedule it. And then that takes away that creative aspect, right? So it becomes a cost conversation. Do I spend on someone to think about this or do I just, use a subscription to generate it?
Yeah.
So that's going to be tough, I think, for the creative industry because it will come at a loss of revenue.
Yeah. I also feel like, as somebody who is like sort of using AI in the workflow, we had recently a client come to us and they were like, "Oh, but you can just generate this in AI." So generally, the like VFX team that I work with, they tend to be quite expensive. And the client was like, "Oh, you can just generate in AI," and we were like, "And it is still not going to be dirt cheap. Like, what are you talking about?"
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people are just not aware as well.
Yeah.
And like we spoke about this last week, using AI, which I'm a huge proponent of, like in general for
Yeah.
operations,
Yeah.
optimizing daily life. You need to know the limits of that platform and what you're able to feed into it, obviously.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people don't understand that. They just may, especially with the creative field, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, just
Yeah.
use AI.
I also feel like, and I don't know, maybe you can also share your thoughts on this, but I also feel like a lot of people don't have that much refined taste. So, like, they might know when something is great, but they don't know how to take something that feels mediocre to great. And then they're just like, do something and they want to hand wave it.
Yeah, this happens so much. Actually, right before I got on this podcast, one of my colleagues in my team, she sent me this really funny video on Instagram. Just a video of a client saying, think outside the box. And then the agency is like, do you want to define the box? Because I feel like we're going up and down on this a little too much. But yeah, I think this happens all the time. But one way that I have tried to navigate it is to ask people questions about why they need what they need done. Because even though they're not able to
Hmm.
articulate what the end product looks like, at least if I can understand what they're thinking and what's going on in their heads and why they even brought a digital agency on in the first place or wanted to do this campaign in the first place, then sometimes I'm able to draw those dots and say, okay, maybe there's a different way of doing it if, we're hitting a roadblock. Maybe there's another way to think about it. But some people are open to that, some people are not.
Hmm.
It's about finding the kind of people who want to work with you that way.
So, how has it been different working for a team where you are a part of the team versus working for clients? Because, like, it must be different, right?
Very different. And especially, working in the development social sector and then working in an agency environment with clients. That's two different ends of the spectrum, I feel. But before my last development sector job, I actually worked at a PR agency. And I feel like that was a steep learning curve for me. That was like a little break for me from development as well. I said, I want to go
Hmm.
into the private sector. I want a different pace because development tends to be very bureaucratic.
Hmm.
The large international organizations, staff has been around sometimes for 15, 18 years. So it's like, uh, it's about the honor of the job and all of that too, right? So it's just so difficult sometimes to get things done. So that was really frustrating for me. And the amount of paperwork to get a simple thing done again was really frustrating. So I think right before COVID, I was like, I am out. I am getting out. Oh no, in the first year of COVID, I think, of the pandemic, I said, I need a change of pace.
Hmm.
And I joined the private sector and agency where I was working with clients. I was working on public relations. So I got a little bit of an understanding there on what it means to service clients because that's very different. It's a services industry. And it's almost like hospitality in some ways. You got to, put on a smile. And even if absurd requests come your way, you gotta, still be like, okay, let me see what I can do for you. And that I needed to switch my brain to be able to do that almost. And so I was lucky I got to do a little bit of that then. And then, having my own company now is a lot more difficult because now I see myself as a growth partner for my clients. And I think, I feel like in addition to thinking about my business, I'm always thinking about their businesses too. How can they grow? How can, we maximize on a certain campaign or a certain initiative or, for them. So it's been interesting. It's definitely two different worlds. The development sector, comes with everything, with all of that, right? Generations, years of processes,
Yeah.
etc. And right now, for me, running a startup, things are a lot more fluid. And I like that.
Awesome. Okay, so what are you looking forward to the most from the coming year? Like we've just begun 2025. We went on this like really awesome retreat, met so many awesome people. So like how are you feeling about the rest of the year and what are your plans?
I am feeling great, especially after our residency last week. So Divya and I were at almost like a growth accelerator, lots of things, but it really, for me, got me. I feel like it gave me a little bit more power and trust in my own potential.
Hmm.
Because that's something I think, losing my job, trying to sort of quickly put things together. I was very quick, I think, to move forward. I did lull on it a couple of days. Obviously, when you are told you're
Yeah.
losing your job, that's never happened to me before. It was a very hard thing to
Yeah.
process. But everybody else is going through it too. It was a global issue. It wasn't something I could control. So I had to say, hey, maybe you need to look a different way. And so that's what I've done. I have very big goals this year. I am very excited to officially launch Lines publicly as well, because, these few months I've been doing a lot of the groundwork, but I'm very excited to launch it. I am getting married to my partner of 10
Yes.
years. I know, and I'm so excited about that. That's happening in a couple of months. And yeah, I'm just excited for, I feel, the 2.0 for our lives because we've been together for 10 years. We've grown in those 10 years as well. And this year feels like that accelerate point. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
I'm really excited for you, for like, both your company and like, how it grows and you guys getting married. So exciting. And the place looks beautiful, by the way. Everybody,
I
Sri
know
Lanka
I'm
is
excited.
beautiful. Just if you're in Bangalore, definitely just fly, like just take a weekend flight. It's like one and a
It's
half hour
worth it.
away. Go
Yeah,
it, do it. It's so nice.
it's beautiful. Yes, you should come.
Yeah.
You should come
Yeah.
again, Divya, when we need to
Yeah.
hang out.
Yeah, for sure. I have told my mom we are going and she loves nature. I'm sure she'll love Sri Lanka.
It's a treat for everyone. The beaches, the hills.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks a lot for coming, Anuki. This was really lovely. I'm so glad we got to do this.
Thank you so much. When you asked me if I could be on your podcast, absolutely yes. I've not done it before, but you were lovely to me. So I was like, absolutely, let's do this. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.